Okay, so today I want to bring up a topic that you may be on something that you may be hearing a lot more of lately coming out of mainstream and places like Davos, um, and the other think tanks like Club of Rome, Bilderberg, uh, Council of Foreign Relations, the usual suspects. So, and that is the reset, right? Everyone keeps talking about this reset. Hey, we're doing a reset. It's a reset. Time for a reset. Hillary Clinton said, "Yeah, I hit the reset button back in 2016." What does all this mean? What are they talking about? Well, oddly enough, I'm glad you asked, because this is stuff that us conspiracy theorists, us lunatic fringe, have been talking about them doing for a long time, and this is not the first reset. I'm going to talk about the last reset and then other prior resets in this podcast, and why it's important that you know what a reset is, what it's about, and what they think you should know about it, and what they know about it, and what they're going to do about it. And it's important because if you think this is something that is just willy-nilly and this is just talk on the side, um, that's why I want to bring up the other times that this has happened and to show you with real facts. That's what we do here at Ideologically Illogical. Welcome to the show. We present real facts and real history to prove our point, and then allow you to make up your own mind, your decision, and you can investigate anywhere you look using your own resources and your own sources of information. I'd love it if you guys would respond. I think I've got it open for you guys to respond using voice as well as text. So, and then we can get discussions going. So, without further ado, what is a reset? Why is everyone talking about it? Why is it being the point of contention here at Davos? And we all know what side uh, we're talking about. It's not the conservative right. This would be the liberal left. Is primarily and the globalists, right, that are on board with all of this. And if you've been paying attention or following along to anything anywhere in politics or sub politics for the last 10 years, you'll know that most of this has not been talked about until now here recently, and all of a sudden it seems like overnight. Well, of course it's been always been that way. And so now you're wondering, well, I don't understand what's with this reset. My loony cousin used to talk about this years ago, and we used to make fun of him. But now the officials are actually talking about it like it's a real thing. So that's why we want to break it down for you and show you everywhere that it's happened before in America and in other places around the world, and get your interpretation as to what's going on, and at least make you aware of what a reset is and why. That's, I think, the important part, why they are initiating this current reset, and why it is also one of the most important ever. So stay tuned. I got to go pay this bill, and we will be right back to continue with the great reset of 2020. Derbitor. Of course, I know it's 2021 silly. That's not the point. The point was their agenda and their countdown started at 2020. And if you haven't noticed, that's when the pandemic started, although they even called it COVID-19 to even try to retrograde it back to that year. When in actuality, what they're planning on is for 2030. Now, I know all this sounds complicated and a bunch of BS to you right now, unless you're in the inn and you know what's been going on, in which case you're like ready to hear what I've got to say. For those that don't know what all that means, start your research now and go ahead and hit the pause button. We'll be here later when you come back to get the rest of the information. We're not going anywhere. We got tons of more episodes to back this up with even more in-depth information about not just the resets, but the construction on these things, who's doing it, the breakaway societies and civilizations, the secret alien race that has been living among us all this time. You name it, it's all in Ideologically Illogical. And again, all backed up with the facts of the facts that you can go look at for yourself. So without further ado, I don't even know what an ado is, but they always say that. So without a further ado, what is a reset? Why are they important? Well, a reset, in plain simple terms, is when a civilization has been living a certain way with certain beliefs, certain standard of livings, a whole mantra, so to speak. Let's take the Roman civilization. There were certain laws that you had to abide by. One of them was you had to wear that the robes, right? Pants were illegal. If you were to be a citizen, you had to do these things. Now, yes, you could travel through the city and do commerce in your pants and stuff and breeches, but you were considered a what? A barbarian. And really, people only started wearing breeches and pants when they started riding horses. The Scythians and those over there and way over in the east that started this stuff and became, the Attila the Huns and these raiders and marauders, because a lot of it was, back then everyone was nomadic and ground and land. No one owned it way back in the day. I mean, I'm getting off topic. But that's what I'm talking about with a reset. Every time we go through these certain ways of living, whether it was being nomadic and then we switch to cities, then whether it's we live a certain way in these cities and then we switch to another way, that is a reset. And the reason they're called resets is because technology has advanced so much and gotten us up to a point that doing a slow transition at will over time is not feasible. And the best way to do it is like pulling off a Band-Aid. You just rip that sucker off and there it is. Now, if you look at American history and you go back into our history, there's the fake weaponized history that they teach you in school and has been put out in all the books. And a lot of people back that up without realizing it because that's what they were taught. So they start writing fiction about it. And that just reinforces this fake belief system about what history used to be. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go look at my episode on the father of Hollywood, and you'll see that when they did this last reset, they pretty much found these cities here all intact with everything there. We subjugated them, took them over, stuck up, rehung the American flag, yay, hurrah, it's all us, and then convinced the masses that this is something that we invented over time and progression and happened naturally and organically, when in reality there was nothing organic about any of it, and there was no it all happened in, basically like just add water and spontaneously everything pops up all at once. So if you look at the timeline between 1870 through 1900, you're going to see it was pretty much right after the was it the Civil War, and then we had the Louisiana Purchase. So a lot of major things were going on in America, and most people at that time were still kept in those colonial cities and told not to leave. The Indians were bad; they're going to kill you. So everyone was pretty much confined onto the East Coast. And you had predominantly the white European class that came, and they came into New York. And then you had the African American class that came up through the Caribbean, and they came into the Black Belt down through the South. Not sure how all these Chinese got here that supposedly built the railroads that we hear about in all the Westerns. But it's, if you want to think about how you learned about your Western beliefs and how you think of when you think of Western history, where did you learn it from? You learned it from Hollywood. Right, and you learned it from the books and movies that people learned from Hollywood and then wrote themselves. It's very rare that someone actually lived any of this and wrote it, and you'll find that those that did were probably in on the know and wrote it for disinformation, and that's part of the reset. So I find it interesting that in 1870 we had electric moving sidewalks, we had electric powered lighting. We had gondolas and waterways and stuff like this in Chicago, and buildings that look immensely European. The largest building in the world. St. Louis had the largest train station in the world. We had the largest Ferris. I mean, all these things. And it's like, well, of course we were America. We were growing. We were great. No, 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 no. Go back to your timeline. At this point in time, the mass influx of migration had not yet happened. There was only, when in 1776, there was only 2.5 million people here. To show you the contrast, President Biden, if you want to call him president, just allowed 11 million illegals to become residents. So at our inception, we were only 2.5 million. Biden just allowed 11. That's what, 4 times the amount that we were when we had our inception. And even as late as 1870, if you look at the population, there was none. There's hardly any population here, and most of the population came from 1900 until the year 2000, and we went from basically just at 70 million, and jumped it all the way up to the 330, 40 million we are now, and steadily climbing. And they're bringing in more and more immigrants, and because that's how they make their money, through taxation. Um, all of this was part of their plan. In other words, they could have had the influx of people for those first 300 years when Columbus first discovered America, and all the other nations were here, and most likely they did. And that's the big cover up, because when you look at these cities and why they had to do the reset, it shows you that it was a different way of living, a different way of life. And since we're bringing in all these newcomers from all these different places, and nobody knows one another, and they all speak different languages, we'll create this false history of the Old West. Will create this somewhat false history of slavery and make it out to be way worse than what it ever was. I'm not saying there wasn't slavery, but a lot of it was more indentured servitude to pay off passage, and then they'd get their own 50 acres. That was changed after an African American in the United States did not want to release his slave. So there's real history, and then there's the fake history you've been taught. Not to mention that only 2% of all people in America ever owned slaves, which means 98% of all Americans in the entire history of America never owned slaves. So therefore, this cannot be such a racist place if 98% of us are not racist and never had slaves. Follow the math, follow the science, follow the logic, folks. And it's all about them dividing and conquer, dividing and conquer. And if you haven't noticed what they're doing right now in America, it's across the planet, actually, because that's the next big reset. So prior to, like, the reset in America was just for America. And then they had other resets when you look at how they went from living in caves, and then they moved out of the caves and on the land. That was a reset time. And then we went from a certain period of building a certain way and a certain architecture, and did a reset because technology grows, and we grew with it. And that's what's happening now. And like I said, when you look at these old world fairs, especially the ones in the United States, and what they were bringing out, like moving sidewalks, electric sidewalks, and I'm talking about in the 1800s, and a lot of other technology that you wouldn't think they would have, electric moving vehicles driving around these places, and just lights. And I'm talking about big spotlights and things like that. You really need to look up these pictures. I'm looking at some myself right now, and I am blown away. Um, while you're looking that up, I'm going to go pay this bill, and I will be right back to continue our talk on the reset and why it matters most right now with the current reset, and why you're probably wondering why current politics makes no sense. And I'm about to explain to you why it's going to make sense in a minute.